Hi everyone, and welcome to the first of many lectures that you will have during this summer session of Intro to Visual Arts. I'm your professor, Mackenzie Nunnally. This particular introduction lecture is going to correspond with the intro chapter in your Gateways textbook. Now, I'm not going to touch on every single page or topic of the introduction chapter. However, I'm going to sort of emphasize what I think are some of the more important ideas in the chapter, but I do encourage you to read the chapter from start to finish because you will have the quiz in the folder to take. So let's go ahead and get started here. So one of the most basic questions that is addressed within this course is, what is art? Now, this is not an easy question to answer because people define art in various ways. Art is inherently subjective. It means different things to different people depending on their experiences, depending on how they interact with the work of art or how familiar they are with the world of art, depending on their context, where they live, where they have lived in the past, their religious beliefs. All sorts of things play into our definitions of art. So let's look at a couple. According to the Random House Dictionary, art is the quality, production, expression, or realm of what is beautiful or of more than ordinary significance. So with that definition in mind, let's look at these three works of art. We have Marcel Duchamp's The Fountain from 1917, Andy Warhol's Brillo Box from 1964, and the Italian Maurizio Cattelan's Comedian from 2019. So we have what is essentially a porcelain urinal turned up on its side and presented as a work of art. We have a replica of a cardboard box that contained Brillo soap pads that were sold in grocery stores across America. And we have a banana that has been duct taped to the wall in an art gallery. So if our definition of art includes the quality, production, expression, or realm of what is beautiful or more than ordinary significance, do these items fit that definition? Another definition of art to consider comes from the Oxford English Dictionary. It says that art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. So with that in mind, here we're looking at two paintings that were made by an elephant in Thailand. Now, elephants have the largest brains of any land mammals, and they are known to be creative. Some of these works have fetched thousands of dollars, which have ultimately been put towards funding conservation efforts for elephants in Thailand. But is this art if our definition of art consists of the expression or application of human creativity, skill, and imagination? Perhaps this is skill, perhaps this is even creativity, but it's not human. So is it art? I've included a 5-minute clip from a lecture given by President Leon Botstein from Bard College. And in his lecture, he asks, what is art? And so it's a short clip, about 5 minutes. I go and watch it once you're finished with this lecture. But essentially, he says art is connected to what we experience every day, but it represents some kind of transformation of the everyday, something that is not actually entirely real. It makes us stop and think about something quite important in an entirely different way. So Botstein argues that art is inherently artificial. It is not entirely real. But it also transforms our everyday experiences into something new. And it forces us to stop and see the everyday in a new way. It provides us with new or deeper insights into our own existence and experiences. And lastly, one of the most well-known graphic designers in American history, Milton Glaser, he defines art as whatever. He says, what determines whether it falls into what we call the category of art is not about its form, but about its effect. The aspirations of art are not about the moment of time that you're in, but rather about the continuity of human experience. Art has always functioned in the same way. It changes your perception of what is real. Art is transformative. Once someone experiences art, there are changes in consciousness, of awareness of what reality is. If it doesn't change people, then it's not art. So as we approach this class, we might just keep in our minds a sort of working definition of art. Maybe we can think of that as the expression or application of human creativity on a broad scale, including music, theater, dance, literature, sculpture, painting, and other visual art forms, and beyond. Ultimately, art is a form of visual language because it communicates ideas by visual means that can help us understand the world in new and exciting ways and help us to strengthen the understanding that we already have. Definitions of art can also tell us a lot about our own attitudes, stereotypes, rather than just about the objects that are under consideration. For example, in Western culture, so in European and American culture, really, especially since the Renaissance, the term fine art has generally been used to refer to artworks that are traditionally paintings, sculptures, drawings, and sometimes prints that have been made with skill and creative imagination to be pleasing or beautiful to look at. Other art forms like ceramics or woodworking, textile making, and others have been considered less important, and the term craft has been applied to such works. And the makers are considered craftspeople, and they are often seen as being less skilled or of lower status than painters and sculptors who are true, quote, artists. Now, this distinction arose partly because of how expensive it was to create a painting or a sculpture during the Renaissance era. So these art forms became status symbols of the rich and powerful. Now, additionally, art from cultures beyond the West, such as the traditional arts of Africa, the Pacific Islands, the Native Americas, etc., these have long been deemed, quote, primitive arts by Europeans, implying that they are of a lesser quality than Western fine art. Now, I think it's also there's this idea in Western society that clay, wood, fibers, all of these are somehow lesser media because outside of Europe, in these so-called primitive areas, these are and have been the primary or favored materials for creative expression. And so the materials were considered primitive themselves and thought that they didn't require as much skill or thought to be used. In modern capitalist societies, art is often valued monetarily or financially. And we have this tendency to take a work of art and place a higher value upon it, a higher value both financially and aesthetically, if it is original or unique. And then we take these artworks that we've ascribed these values to rather arbitrarily, and we lock them away in these pristine museums, literally behind plexiglass and guards. Yes, for their protection, but in some ways it also limits the accessibility and it removes the art from everyday life and kind of sets it apart as something for the elite or something for the few rather than for everyone. But if we only include works that are in museums and galleries within our definitions of art, that will exclude many more works that exist in public or communal spaces. In many societies, artworks have not been and still are not made to be sold or put on display behind glass, never to be touched by human hands. Instead, artworks are often integral to everyday life. They can be used in everyday activities or as parts of rituals that have social and spiritual significance. So art is inevitably influenced by its context or the circumstances surrounding the creation of a work of art. Now, context includes historical events, social conditions, biographical facts about the specific artist, the intentions of the specific artist. And so art exists within this wider visual culture that we encounter on a daily basis. It reflects the culture in which it was created, not just the achievements of its maker, but all sorts of things like cultural, political, and religious values. And these determine what or who gets included in the definitions of art or artist. Um, But regardless of cultural and historical contexts, art makers fulfill similar roles. They create places that are used for various human purposes. They create extraordinary versions of ordinary objects. They record and commemorate. Artists are truly keepers of history and of culture. They create images and works that are meant to remind us of the past. They also give tangible form to the intangible or the unknown. They can portray visibly that which can only be imagined, or they can give tangible form to feelings and ideas. Ultimately, artists and art makers give us new perspectives and really help us to see the world in new ways. So why should we study and learn to discuss art? Well, because our interpretations of works of art will inevitably differ from other people's according to our perceptions, beliefs, and ideas. We learn to see, we learn to experience new sensations and ideas that expand our horizons beyond our daily lives through the study and discussion of art. Art, again, is a form of visual language. It communicates even more powerfully than written language oftentimes because it communicates directly with our senses. Yes, our sense of sight, but also it can communicate with our sense of touch, sound, smell, etc. And art in this way can help us understand our own experiences. And so all forms of communication, art included, have a purpose or a message. The subject or the subject matter of a work of art is the person, object, or space that is depicted. Think of the subject as being the obvious topic of the artwork. So here we're looking at three different artworks, two paintings and one sculpture. Now, obviously, they all look different, and they were all made under different contexts, but we could say that the subject matter or the subject of all three of these is the same. That could simply be a female figure or a woman. But if we were to dig into the context a bit more, we would discover that even though the subject matter is the same, the meaning or the content is different in all three of these. So subject really only offers basic or preliminary information about the content or meaning of the work of art. Art that is representational is art that depicts easily recognizable subject matter. Um, this does not mean that we automatically understand everything the work of art is trying to communicate. Rather, it just means that the objects or the subject is depicted in a way that we can easily recognize what is being represented. Anyone looking at the work of art would recognize it and agree on what it is. This type of art is also called objective art because everyone agrees on the subject matter. For example, this sculpture here by Edmonia Lewis, everyone looking at this sculpture would agree that the subject matter is a male figure and a kneeling female figure next to him. Now, the message or meaning is deeper than that and would involve some information about the context, about the artist, etc. But we can all agree that this is representational of a male and female figure. Artworks can also be non-objective, meaning they do not depict easily recognizable subject matter. In fact, non-objective artworks deliberately depict non-recognizable objects or subjects. They don't give us things that we might see in the world around us every day. Non-objective artworks are subjective, which means that without any contextual information about the artist's experiences or intent, we each make our own interpretations about what the artwork might mean or communicate, if anything at all. Now, non-objective is not necessarily the same as non-representational, because just because these works of art are not easily recognizable as forms, they still technically represent something, maybe an idea, an emotion, a certain event, various things. But just because we don't immediately recognize what is being represented doesn't necessarily mean nothing is being represented. Abstraction is the degree to which an image is altered from an easily recognizable subject. So abstraction refers to the ways in which an artist can emphasize, distort, simplify, arrange, etc., all of the different formal elements of an artwork. So most works of art lie somewhere between representational and non-objective, depending on the degree of abstraction that is used. So abstraction is really a spectrum with representational at one end and non-objective at the other. And so these concepts can really help us analyze what the artist intended or wished to communicate. And so for example here, Alan Hauser's Reverie from 1981. This is representational or non-objective? I would say it's representational, although it's definitely been abstracted to a greater degree. We have sort of a irregular oval-like shape here, but then we have two recognizable human-like faces that help us understand this distorted form as a female figure, a mother, wrapped in kind of a large cloak, cradling her infant in her lap. Now, non-objective works can be a little bit more tricky to understand, and so the context can be even more important. So this work by the artist Eva Hesse is simply untitled, though sometimes it is referred to as her rope piece because it is made of rope. But it was made in 1969, 1970, and this is certainly a non-objective artwork. It does not present us with a recognizable image or form. But let's talk about the context. So Eva Hesse, she was born in Germany and she was barely able to escape the country before the Holocaust. Now, most of her artworks are meant to be evocative and full of personal history and meaning. Here, she has tied knots into long lengths of rope and then dipped those into liquid latex and hung them to dry. Now, she made this work not long after being diagnosed with a brain tumor, which she actually died from later the same year, so later in 1970. And so the elements of her works have often been seen as relating to parts of the human body. Here, perhaps intestines, or maybe veins. And then the latex as a material, when it dries, it feels like human skin. And over time, it deteriorates just as the human body deteriorates. Now, this particular work, each and every time it is installed, it looks slightly different. The ropes fall in different ways. The shapes are slightly different. The piece sort of seems to morph or shrink and expand, evolve with each installation, sort of like it's a living thing. And so Eva Hesse has described this work as representing the chaos of life and death. And so knowing that she, was born in Germany and escaped just before the Holocaust and experienced all of that chaos and violence, and then knowing about her own health and her diagnosis with a brain tumor, and how she's interested in how the human body sort of changes and grows and decays. I think all of that information helps us to make sense of this non-objective work of art. So once more, art is a form of visual language. And so just like a verbal language is communicated through vocabulary and grammar, visual artists rely on visual vocabulary and rules, which are sort of similar to grammar, to create their compositions or their works of art. And so we call these vocab and grammar the elements and principles of art. So the elements are the basic vocabulary of how artists create their works of art. These include line, shape, form, value, space, color, texture, volume, mass, and motion and time. We sort of lump those together as a single element. Now, the principles are the basic rules. These are sort of similar to grammatical rules, and they help artists to determine how to effectively implement or organize the formal elements within their composition or the artwork as a whole. So the principles include balance, contrast, emphasis, focal point, pattern, proportion, rhythm, scale, unity, and variety. So the principles are the rules that explain how an artist combines or organizes the elements or the vocabulary. You can also think of the elements as being the ingredients, and the principles are the recipe or the way in which those ingredients are combined to create a whole. And so artists utilize the elements and principles in various ways to communicate their ideas, their emotions, to create certain sensations within the viewer, or to convey social or political convictions visually. Any work of art, regardless of its form or the culture from which it came, can be discussed in terms of the visual elements and principles of design, in which, through a process that is called a visual or a formal analysis. And so we will talk about how to perform a visual or formal analysis, and then you will do a couple of those throughout this course. So overall, my goals for this course are to introduce students to the fundamental vocabulary, materials, processes, histories, concepts, and themes of visual art, to provide students with a foundation for the individual understanding, analysis, and appreciation, if not enjoyment of art, and to explore the diverse ways in which different cultures throughout human history have visualized, constructed, represented, and perceived their realities using visual art.